Thank you. I'd like to find out how many visa applications of any kind are currently on hand for Palestinian nationals who have connections or family in Australia.
Senator, I can give you a figure on-hand applications. I don't think I'll be able to distinguish between those who have no connection and those who have a connection. We'd have to look at the individual cases.
Sure. Thank you.
And this figure's end of September, Senator. The figure's 200 applications outside Australia.
200. And how many of those applications are currently located outside of Gaza or the West Bank, Egypt, Jordan, elsewhere?
Senator, again, we can report on inside Australia and outside Australia. When you have to go to address details, it's not something we have readily available. I can say though, Senator, what we have seen in terms of the applications we've been receiving from outside Australia is the majority are in the occupied Palestinian territories, and the majority of those have been with addresses in Gaza.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I'll put some others on notice then, given the difficulties with the data. My understanding is that one of the reasons a humanitarian visa pathway 449 or 786 has not been provided for people from Gaza is due to the closure of the Rafah crossing and the subsequent difficulty in escaping. Is that correct?
Senator, that certainly provides a difficulty for individuals in terms of travelling from Gaza. The opportunity to apply for visas is open to any applicant to apply for any type of visa that's available. So it doesn't relate so much to the closing of the Rafah crossing.
Okay. And so how many humanitarian visas have Palestinians applied for?
Senator, and the figures here are between 7th of October 2023 and the 15th of October 2024. There's been 240 applications outside of Australia.
And for tourist visas?
Tourist visas, 10,309 outside of Australia.
And so of those 240 humanitarian visas, how many have been approved?
Senator, in the period between 7th of October and 15th, 2023 and 15th of October 2024, that figure I have is 13.
13. And have the rest been rejected, or are they still just...
My understanding is they're on hand, but I'll correct the record if needed.
What's the expected processing time of a humanitarian visa?
It's difficult to comment on how long it would take to process any particular visa, given it would depend on the circumstances of individual cases and how it aligns with government priorities.
What are the government priorities at the moment with people applying from Gaza?
The humanitarian program is primarily focused on those who've been displaced from their country or place of residence, and we focus primarily on UNHCR referrals in the program.
Sure. Does that include Gaza?
By way of UNHCR referrals, we don't tend to have UNHCR referrals for Palestinians, given UNRWA's responsibility for managing Palestinians.
Senator, can I just add a point in respect of the earlier evidence I gave? That was in relation to all visa categories around where we've seen people are. In terms of the large proportion are in Gaza. Mm-hmm. I just make the point though that in all of those statistics, when it's outside Australia, it could be an application anywhere in the world that's lodged by someone who's holding a Palestinian travel document.
Sure. Do you know how many Australians have Gazan family members who are either in Gaza or have fled Gaza and not in Australia?
I don't have the figure.
Why not?
Senator, we respond to obviously applications from individuals rather than tracking Australians with family, and so the way in which we establish whether someone seeking to travel from Gaza has family in Australia is when they apply for a visa and we assess their application.
Sure. Thank you. And just to go back to those 240, what's the breakdown between 449s and 786s?
So those applications would relate to the 200 subclass humanitarian visa. The 786 visa that you're referring to is only available to people who are onshore on a case-by-case basis when offers are made by the Minister.
How many of them have been approved or given?
Yes. So as of 1 November, 68 offers of a 786 visa have been made by the Minister. 4 of those offers are still outstanding. Of the remainder, 48 have been granted the 449, which is the first visa in that two-step process. And of those 48, 31 have been granted the 786 visa, which is the 3-year temporary humanitarian visa.
Thank you. And am I correct in saying that it was 449s that were predominantly used for people fleeing Afghanistan and Ukraine?
For Afghanistan.
Yep. Minister, what's happening here with 449s? Why aren't we seeing a consistent approach when it comes to humanitarian visas?
Well, I'm not sure that what we've heard necessarily says that it's an inconsistent approach.
So
We saw 5,000 humanitarian visas allocated in Afghanistan.
Well,
I'm hearing we've had 240.
that's but to be fair, the number issued for people from Afghanistan is over a much longer period of time.
What period of time?
I think it's several years, isn't it? That people started. I mean, people started leaving Kabul. Well, the fall of Kabul was, from memory, 2021. So I'm happy to be corrected, but the numbers that we've been given about Afghan visas would be over that period of time rather than a much shorter period of time when it comes to Palestinian visas. I remember the discussion we had about this point at the last estimate, Senator Pocock, and since that time the government has made a longer-term visa available for Palestinians coming to Australia, and there have been some take that up.
How many have received that?
I'd have to get the department to give you the figures, noting that it's pretty early days, and again, the figure's not going to be huge. But
That's the data that I just provided.
Okay. Minister, these are tiny numbers compared to what we saw the coalition do with Afghanistan. It's been well over 12 months now. Why is the Labor government so slow in actually recognising the horrendous plight of people in Gaza and Australians who have family there who are desperate to get them here?
I don't accept the view that the government has been, I can't remember the word you used to describe the government's actions. We have already granted, I think it was a couple of thousand visas. We've opened up a new category.
Tourist visas.
Yeah, and we've opened up a new longer-term category, which people are now applying for and are being granted, and inevitably that number will grow as time goes on. I don't think it's fair to compare those numbers to any other world event which has happened longer ago, and where, of course, the number is going to be higher because people have been granted visas over a longer period of time.
The thing I'm hearing from people is that they are really disappointed at just how long it's taking to actually recognising what we're seeing unfold over there and the desperation people are feeling to get family out, and yet we're hearing about numbers of 240. It just doesn't seem to. It doesn't seem to stack up.
Sure, but I mean that's 240 of a larger group that have been given a visa, albeit a shorter term visa. But Senator Pocock, unfortunately, you know, I am in no way diminishing what people in Gaza are going through. It is appalling. And you know, our government is committed to helping as much as we can, but unfortunately the reality is that in every world travel spot there are far, far more people seeking to get out than any one country can take in. There are, you know, while the number of Afghan visas we have granted is much higher than the number of Palestinian visas, I know that there are members of the Afghan community who are desperate to have family members able to get visas in Australia as well. You know, we're doing what we can. We've opened up a new visa category, and I'm sure that that number will increase as time goes on.
Mm-hmm. And Senator, if I can add, we are working as hard as we can with the community of visa holders in Australia to progress the transition to 449 and 687.
Mm-hmm. And that's just for people in Australia?
That's for people in Australia, and Mr Kiley has outlined the process for humanitarian visas through our normal humanitarian program. But we are very conscious of the needs of this community, and we are doing all we can to assist.
Thank you. And will Palestinians who are on a 786 have the same ability to go through a resolution of status after 3 years that's available to people from Ukraine?
So, Senator, that decision will be made closer to the time, but absolutely.
Sorry, can I just ask why, given it doesn't seem to have been made close to the time for Ukraine?
So, Senator, I think what we are seeing now with the Ukrainian visas is transitioning from the temporary humanitarian stay visa to a resolution of status visa after some years in country. And so those temporary humanitarian stay visas, as you know, are of a 3-year duration. As they start to expire, Ukrainian families, individuals in Australia will start to transition through the resolution of status to a permanent visa. That pathway is likely also to be available as we reach that point with the Palestinian population.
Thank you. When was the decision made for people fleeing on those visas from Ukraine?
Senator, we recently started to process that pathway to permanency.
And that's a decision of government?
So, Senator, that's within the remit of the Immigration Minister to initiate that process.
And if I heard Ms Foster correctly, that decision was made as the 3-year mark was approaching for people who had been granted temporary humanitarian visas of 3 years duration. And so it would be fair to assume that in relation to Palestinian visa holders, we will make a decision about setting up a similar process to what we did for Ukrainian visa holders as we get closer to that 3-year mark. We're sort of doing it in stages, just as we did with Ukrainian visa holders.
Thank you. And just finally, thanks, Chair. And maybe to Ms Foster, given it seems to me it's just such an ad hoc approach to humanitarian visas, has there been any work done to actually develop some sort of framework that guides the way that we respond to humanitarian visas with things that happen overseas? And we talk a lot about social cohesion, and it seems to me one of the things that is actually adding to some of the angst around it is that they're seeing very different responses based on where people come from, what some of the geopolitics of that are, the perceptions. You know, no one's talking about Sudan visas at the moment. Has work happened on some sort of framework, or is that not underway?
So, Senator, I think I'd like to take that in 2 parts. The first is the humanitarian program that has a number of components, but the largest component is those people who are referred to us through UNHCR. Every year we review the composition of that program depending on circumstances globally, on needs, on requirements, and you'll obviously be very aware that it was in that program that we did quite significant increases to cater for the Afghan humanitarian applicants. Secondly, we have the immediate response to a crisis, which, as you know, typically runs through using a visitor visa to get people to Australia quickly, and then looking at what options are appropriate for that cohort, given the nature of the conflict, the circumstances around it, what the possible trajectory might be. And there has indeed been, if I can put Afghanistan to one side for a second, because the circumstances there with Australia's involvement, etc., were somewhat different. The approach we are now using with the Palestinian cohort who has already come to Australia is very similar to that which we used for Ukraine.
Can I just ask?
I thought that was your last question.
That was.
So
I was keen to get the Minister's thoughts on that.
Senator,
Minister, this has been highly politicised. Surely we should have a framework to how we respond to emergency disasters, wars.
I can't add much to what Ms Foster said, but we do. It may not be. I understand that there are members of the community who would like us to grant more visas to people coming from Palestine, the Palestinian occupied territories. I understand people would like to see them processed faster. As I said to you, Senator Pocock, that the process that we're adopting is actually quite similar to what we did in relation to Ukrainian visa holders. It's quite similar to what's happened for other world trouble spots as well. We simply cannot, admit every single person who would like to come here from a world trouble spot, but we're doing what we can.
I understand that. I guess 10,000 Ukrainians.
I know, Senator
240.
Pocock, you've got the political point to make, but I've got to share the call and we can come back to you for the question.